Chapter 1. The Names Wine Salima Arbalest, Part 2. The Earthworld Empire was a large nation located on the eastern half of the Varno continent. Blessed with a temperate climate and fertile lands, it was rich in mineral resources, and it boasted access to fisheries in one of the largest, most prized lakes on the continent. The empire was abundant with essentially everything. For that reason, it also had a long history of suffering foreign invasions, essentially since its founding. To fend them off, the empire focused its efforts on military development, and, before anyone had time to realize, it had become the strongest nation on the continent. When the current emperor rose to power, he consolidated those forces to occupy neighboring nations one by one. The continent was close to being unified under one leader for the first time in history. At least, that was the case until the day the emperor collapsed. And that concludes my report on Crown Prince Wine Salima Arbalest. Thank you. In a room of the building provided for her, Fish Blundell emitted a small sigh as the aide wrapped up her report. Fish looked to be in her mid-20s, and her winning feature was her flowing blonde hair, which framed her stunning face. But woe to anyone who thought beauty was all there was to her. She was presently residing in the kingdom of Natra as an imperial ambassador of the empire. I suppose the rumors are true. He's wise and benevolent. Yes, he's been acknowledged domestically and internationally as the rightful heir to the throne. Even his recent appointment to regent went largely unopposed. I'm jealous, especially seeing how our own nation has been turned completely upside down. That aside, it's unfortunate we haven't been able to properly meet until today. Well, you relocated to Natra when you became the ambassador, right as he left to pursue his studies in the empire. Yes, Fish had first been assigned to the kingdom of Natra several years prior. Through persistent negotiations, she'd built a decent relationship with the king over the years. But now the situation had completely changed. I wonder how the crown prince will come at us today? He'll likely get straight to the point. He can't afford not to. I've no doubt he'll bring up the imperial troops stationed here. At the moment, there were about 5,000 troops stationed in Natra, a feat accomplished by a series of successful negotiations that secured official permission from their king. But Fish and her aide knew this foreign military presence was being met with anxiety and opposition by the people of the kingdom. Will he demand we withdraw? I can't say for sure. It'll be important to pay attention to his position during the meeting. But let's also keep an eye out for his character. It should be easy to tell whether he's fit to be king. Well, all that being said, anyone who hires a flom is more than a little peculiar. You mean Ninimralii? Who else? I mean, I knew many of them lived here, but I was surprised to see other countries besides the empire appoint flom as vassals. My thoughts exactly. And it would seem this kingdom has a history of accepting them that is far older than ours. Natra must seem odd to nations in the West, since their people only treat the flom as slaves. When the empire finally unifies the continent, we'll eradicate such senseless values and traditions. Well then, let us head to the meeting. Fish stood from her chair. This was the first time they'd be coming together for official business and exchange words beyond a few simple pleasantries. If our information is correct, our lack of progress is nearing its end. We must ensure our troops remain here, no matter what. With a firm resolve, she set out for the meeting. Fish Blundell was originally an ambassador to Vanhelio, Ninim commented, feeding Wine some basic information as she trailed after him down the corridor of the royal palace. Say, Vanhelio is a large nation in the west. Why would she come here? When they were in public, their speech was strictly that of master and servant. Not that speaking this way was particularly difficult. They had a long time to practice and adjust to switching back and forth. Well, she was caught up in political turmoil occurring in her homeland and ended up in Natra while you were in the empire. She may not be rising through the ranks anymore, but she's still very skilled and talented. If she's that good, then I bet she's bored of living in our rural kingdom. Actually, according to her, she is quite satisfied. Our sources have said she's openly stated she's weary of dealing with politics. He smiled wryly. I see. Whatever the case may be, I'm delighted to hear outsiders taking a liking to our nation. But if she's that brilliant, I don't anticipate this meeting to be a straightforward one. The issue at hand is the occupying imperial soldiers, Ninum mentioned. This will be tricky. Wine sighed inwardly. Yeah, can't argue with that. To begin with, why were they even in Natra? On paper, they were using the region to practice drills. That wasn't the whole truth, of course. There were a number of factors at play, but they all led to the same core issue. The kingdom of Natra was in a vulnerable geographic location. Imagine a rough ellipsis. Let's say that's the continent of Varno. Next, picture the giant's backbone, a mountain range stretching from north to south, dividing the continent into two equal halves. It acted as a barrier between east and west, resulting in completely different policies, races, ideologies, and cultures between the two. Of course, it wasn't as if travel between them was impossible. In fact, plenty of roads connecting the two halves had been established in recent years. Unfortunately, most of these paths were only useful for trade and private travel. Compare those roads to the blood vessels in the human body. To take this analogy further, an artery would be a major road that could support the comings and goings of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. There are relatively few major arteries in a human body, and they serve an incredibly vital function. Similarly, these roads hold immense commercial and militaristic value. For a country aiming for complete dominion, one might even say these roads would be indispensable. And it was directly through the kingdom of Natra that the continent's northernmost artery ran. In its bid to control the western lands, this was not a place the empire could ignore. Why did this happen? When the empire stationed its soldiers here, it paid a considerable sum of money for the privilege. It wasn't a one-sided agreement. That said, having foreign soldiers on the kingdom's land was like having a knife pressed to the throat. It made the citizens nervous, and the domestic troops didn't approve, either. Well, to be exact, the military was expecting Wine to force the imperial soldiers to withdraw. It wasn't as if he didn't share their sentiments. After all, it wasn't just a concern for national security, it was a matter of honor. But there was a reason Wine was unable to grant their wish. And that reason was... Drumroll, please. Frankly, I want to butter em up. And there it was. Honestly, going up against a huge country would be a huge pain in the ass, and we could really use the money. I'm totally fine with the whole deal, really. First and foremost, Wine had studied in the Empire, meaning he had a solid understanding of their military prowess. But ignoring the wishes of his troops would also present a problem. I mean, the only reason my rise to regent was so smooth in the first place was because the vassals have high hopes for me. If I disappoint them by immediately wagging my tail at the empire, it'll make things tough from here on out. And if I take off the military, there's the possibility of a coup. He was damned if he did and damned if he didn't. As Wine internally lamented and moaned over his crisis, he realized his aid was gone. Ninum, pardon me. Ninum appeared from the shadows. We've just received word from our spies in the Empire. Word. She handed him a letter. Wine read its contents. Is that so? He cocked an eyebrow. There's no doubt that the ambassador caught wind of this, too. In that case, he closed his eyes for a moment, then started forward. Let's go, Ninum. I've got a plan. All right. But what's your plan again? I've decided, Wine hinted with a grin. We're talking it all. It's been quite some time, Your Highness, greeted Fish Blundell upon Wine's arrival, Ninum in tow. With her aide by her side, she'd been waiting for them in the reception room. I have made your acquaintance on a previous occasion, but allow me to formally introduce myself again. I am the ambassador of the Earth-World Empire, Fish Blundell. And I am the prince of the kingdom of Natra, Wine Selima Arbalest. With that, they sat down. Fish was the one to start off the talks. Thank you for meeting with me. Please accept my sincerest congratulations on Your Highness's ascension to Prince Regent. I do hope I am not too bold in saying we keenly feel the kingdom's grief over His Royal Majesty the King's condition and see your promotion as the only silver lining among these darkest of times. Thank you, Ambassador Blundell. I know I'm carrying the hopes and dreams of many on my shoulders. I intend to do my best not to betray my people. I look forward to working together to foster a cordial relationship between Natra and Earth-World. Of course, Your Highness. The meeting began on a harmonious note. The two exchanged pleasantries and discussed topics with no real meaning or consequence. Or it might appear that way. In reality, they were sizing each other up and taking note of their opponent's character. On one hand, you had an acting head of state. On the other, the ambassador of a powerful nation. They sat face to face, eyeing each other. You might even call it a joint effort. The tension in the room bubbled, palpable in the air. The audience observing them understood. This initial conversation was a calculated, critical dance to find out who had more of an edge. So it's true. He's the real deal. Fish reminded herself not to underestimate him. Usually, the young and inexperienced want to see immediate results. But he acts like he has all the time in the world. He doesn't let his title get to his head, but also speaks easily with someone of my station. He just became regent, but he has a regal air. But she knew her questioning would be thorough, and her talking points were solid. Having said that, she would not resort to underhanded tactics or aggressive interrogations. She needed to remain calm. This opponent was very hard to read. When she was his age, she certainly didn't have this much wisdom and tact. She knew this much for sure. If I'm not careful, I'm done for. She set her senses to high alert and braced herself. As Fish was busy with her own thoughts, something else distracted Wine from the task at hand. Holy. Her boobs are huge. He was the worst of the worst. I didn't notice when she introduced herself, but wow. They're really something else. I know they're two bundles of fat, but it's like they've taken on a life of their own. Is it because the Empire's overabundant in pretty much everything? I mean, when you compare Wine turned around to look at Ninim, who was jotting down notes behind him. Well, more specifically, at her breasts. Yep. The gap in destructive power is pretty obvious. Her quill pen stabbed the back of his head. Oh, Your Highness. No, just a bit of a headache. I guess losing sleep over work isn't the best idea, he suggested, in a hurry to smooth things over. Ninim passed a document to him from behind. Be serious, it said. How the hell did she know what I was thinking? He shivered at the thought of women's intuition. He was still considering this frightening idea when Fish smiled gently at him. At any rate, I feel as though a weight's been lifted. To tell the truth, I had some concerns prior to our meeting about forming good relations with Your Highness. But this has assured me those fears were unfounded. I'm glad to hear you say so, Ambassador. This partnership will certainly help me out and solve some of my worries. Well, I assume you have a never-ending list of worries, now that you're taking over the duties of your office? Like trying to drink the sea, pleasing your citizens, meeting with foreign nations, forming relations with the nobility, strengthening the military, increasing funds, supporting our industries. I take many things into consideration. Which would also include, she said, her eyes glinting shrewdly, our soldiers stationed here. The air froze. The prelude had come to an end. The true battle was about to begin. Well, how are you going to respond? Fish eyed him carefully. Wine opened his mouth. Maintaining relations with the Empire is my top priority. In that case, she started. However, he interrupted, the truth is, the presence of a foreign military makes my own troops uneasy. But his confession had no effect on Fish. She'd expected he might say that. He wanted to save face with the Empire and still win over his people. Now it was time for her to negotiate, with funds or commodities, until they conceded. She had predicted those concessions were his aim, of course, and had come fully prepared. This was exactly why Wine's next statement bewildered her. So I plan on removing the source of their worries. Wah. Removing, you say? Yes. As I mentioned before, I'm very interested in maintaining a cordial relationship with the Empire. To do that, we should attempt to bridge the gap between the two, don't you think? You're right. This is bad. It was clear he had some sort of ulterior motive, but she couldn't figure it out in time. He was setting the pace of their conversation instead of following her lead. But she couldn't regain the initiative at this very moment, not now. It wasn't the time to set things straight. I'd like to take this opportunity to restructure the kingdom's military. Restructure your military. It pains me to admit our armed forces are weak. After all, we haven't spent much time on a real battlefield. This inexperience and naivete has caused friction with the Empire and prevented us from forming a real partnership. And you want to smooth things over by overhauling your military organization? Exactly. The problem is we won't see any progress or growth if we continue to rely only on our limited knowledge, and we don't have the necessary funds to carry it out to boot. Wine smirked. So, Ambassador Blundell, could the Empire give us their funds and military expertise? Fish stood dumbfounded. But it wasn't just her. Her aide and Ninim were also seized by shock and agitation. How stupid. There's no way we'd accept those terms. Her aide screamed internally. A crease formed between Ninim's brow, requesting the Empire to not only train our kingdom's military but also pay for it. That's way too unreasonable. Maybe he's starting big so his next request seems more fair? The two instinctively shot Wine a skeptical look. But it was no use. He was convinced his plan was perfectly sane. And in truth, Fish's reaction was vastly different from the two aides as she sat across from him. Will this resolve our strife? This small gesture will be enough to reach the hearts of my men. And I plan on doing my part to solve the problem as well. She sank into silence, though her mind was a maelstrom. With all eyes on her, she finally caught up with her thoughts enough to speak again. Understood. We can discuss the conditions at a later date, but we will accept this proposal. Thank you, Ambassador. I thought you might understand. They shook hands firmly as their aide stared in disbelief.